My grandson slipped the crumbled piece of paper into my hand under the dinner table, his eyes wide with terrified urgency. I waited until I was alone in the bathroom to unfold it, and the message made my blood run cold. Grandpa, check the storage unit Dad rented. Unit 247. You need to see what is inside before Friday. I thought my son had sold my vintage Mustang to pay for my late wife's medical bills 3 years ago. I thought I was broke and living on their charity. But when I rolled up that metal door at the damp storage facility, I did not just find my car. I found a betrayal so deep and twisted it nearly stopped my heart. And I found the will to destroy them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. My name is Gerald. I am 74 years old, and until last week, I was a prisoner in the very house I bought with 30 years of sweat and sacrifice. As a former logistics director, I used to command warehouses and manage million-dollar inventories. But in my own dining room, I had become a ghost, a nuisance, a burden. It all came to a head on a rainy Tuesday night in Seattle. The weather was miserable, but the atmosphere inside the house was freezing. My daughter-in-law, Monica, placed a steaming platter of roast beef in the center of the table. The smell of rosemary and garlic filled the room, making my stomach growl. I had not eaten a proper meal in days. My hand trembled slightly as I reached out with my fork to take a slice of meat. Suddenly, Monica's hand shot out and slapped my wrist hard enough to leave a red mark. The sound of skin hitting skin echoed off the walls. "Put that fork down, Gerald," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Who said you could touch the prime rib?" That is $20 a pound beef. It is for people who actually contribute to this household, not for leeches who sit around all day watching TV. I froze, rubbing my stinging wrist. I looked across the table at my son Bradley, my boy, the boy I had raised alone after his mother passed. Bradley refused to meet my eyes. He just cut into his steak, focused entirely on his plate, chewing slowly, as if he was deaf to his wife's cruelty. "But Monica," I whispered, my voice sounding raspy and weak. "I am hungry. The doctor said I need protein." "You are 74 years old," she interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Your digestion cannot handle red meat anymore. You will just get sick, and I am not cleaning up after you again. Besides, we are on a budget, thanks to your medical bills." She stood up and walked to the counter, grabbing a plastic bowl. She slammed it down in front of me with a clatter. Inside was a gray, lumpy substance. Oatmeal. Plain, watery oatmeal, without even a pinch of sugar or cinnamon. "Eat your gruel," she commanded, returning to her seat and pouring herself a glass of red wine. "It is all you need. And try not to make a mess this time. I do not want to see drool on my tablecloth." I looked down at the tasteless sludge. It wasn't just about the food. It was the erasure of my dignity. I wanted to scream that this was my table, my house, my money, that bought the wine she was drinking. But I swallowed the rage, just as I swallowed a spoonful of the cold oats. I knew I had to play the part of the frail, confused old man a little longer. If I fought back now, I would lose everything. But under the table, my fist was clenched so tight my fingernails dug into my palm. I was not done yet, not by a long shot. After the humiliation of the oatmeal dinner, I retreated to the living room and sank into my old leather recliner. It was the only piece of furniture from my previous life that Monica had not thrown away, claiming it was an eyesore. I closed my eyes, trying to slow my racing heart, but the peace did not last long. My son Bradley walked into the room. He looked sweaty and nervous, pacing back and forth on the expensive Persian rug. He rubbed his hands together, a habit he had kept since he was a teenager, lying about unfinished homework. "Dad," he said, his voice tight and breathless, "I need your credit card. The pharmacy just called me. Your heart medication is ready for pickup, and the insurance copay went up again. It is $500. I looked at him, studying the desperate lines around his eyes. $500 for a routine refill seemed impossible, even with inflation. I hesitated, my hand hovering over my pocket. I knew I had enough pills for another week, but Bradley stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "Don't look at me like that, Dad," he snapped. "Do you want to have a heart attack tonight? I am trying to help you stay alive here. Just give me the card so I can pay it on their app." I reached into my wallet and handed him the shiny platinum card. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a rising suspicion that was becoming harder to ignore. Bradley snatched the card without a thank you and immediately pulled out his smartphone, tapping furiously. He did not call a pharmacy. He was logging into something else entirely. A moment later, a vibration buzzed against my leg. I had set up instant transaction alerts years ago, a habit from my days managing logistics budgets. I pulled my phone out, shielding the screen from Monica, who was loudly scrubbing dishes in the kitchen. The notification was bright and clear against the dark background. Authorized charge, $500. Merchant, Lucky Star Online Casino. My heart actually skipped a beat, but not from illness. It was from pure heartbreak. I looked up at my son, who was smiling at his screen. The first genuine smile I had seen on his face in months. "Bradley," I said, keeping my voice low so Monica would not hear. "Why did the pharmacy charge come through as a casino?" Bradley's head snapped up. The smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of aggressive panic. His face turned red, but not with shame. It was anger. He marched over and snatched my phone from my hand, his grip painful on my arthritic fingers. "Give me that," he hissed, staring at the screen before shoving it back into my chest. "You are reading it wrong, old man. It says Lucky Star Pharmacy. You know your cataracts are getting worse. You are seeing things that are not there, just like you see people stealing your stuff." "But Bradley," I started to protest, pointing at the clear text. "Stop it," he interrupted, his voice raising to a dangerous level. "You are losing your mind, Dad. This is exactly why Monica says you are not safe to be around, Leo. You are hallucinating numbers. Keep this up and we will have to put you in a home sooner than planned for your own safety." He turned and walked away, whistling a cheerful tune, as if he had not just robbed his own father. I sat there in the dim light, clutching my phone. The screen still glowed with the truth. Lucky Star Casino. He thought I was blind. He thought I was stupid. But that night, as I listened to the faint sound of slot machine noises coming from his phone in the next room, I realized something important. My son was not just a victim of his wife's greed. He was a willing participant. And that realization hurt more than any slap ever could. The air in the dining room was so thick with tension you could choke on it. After Bradley confiscated my phone, the silence returned heavier than before, broken only by the aggressive scraping of Monica's knife against her porcelain plate. She was cutting her roast beef with surgical precision, acting as if nothing had happened, as if her husband had not just stolen $500 from his own father right in front of her. I sat there staring at my empty bowl of oatmeal, feeling a mix of humiliation and burning rage. Across the table, my 12-year-old grandson Leo sat perfectly still. He had not touched his food. His eyes, usually so bright and full of mischief, were cast down, fixed on his peas. I noticed his small hands were trembling slightly under the table. He knew. He saw everything in this house, even when we thought he was not looking. Suddenly, a loud clatter shattered the silence. Leo had dropped his heavy silver fork. It bounced off the hardwood floor with a ringing sound that made Monica jump. "Clumsy boy," she snapped, slamming her napkin down. "Can you not get through one meal without making a mess? Pick it up, now." "I'm sorry, Mom," Leo mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. He slid off his chair and disappeared under the large oak dining table. I watched Monica sigh dramatically, swirling her wine glass. But my attention was drawn to a sudden sensation at my ankle. A small, warm hand gripped my leg, just above my sock line. I stiffened instinctively, but did not look down. I felt paper. Crumbled, rough paper, being shoved frantically between my skin and the wool of my sock. Then came the voice. It was so faint I almost missed it. A desperate breath of air against my knee. "Save me, Grandpa, please." The plea hit me harder than any physical blow. My grandson was not just scared, he was terrified. He crawled back out from under the table holding the fork, his face pale but composed. He sat back down and started eating mechanically, avoiding my gaze entirely. I needed to get out of there. I needed to see what was in my sock. I pushed my chair back, the wood screeching against the floor. "I need to use the restroom," I announced. My voice raspy, trying to sound as pathetic as they expected me to be. Monica rolled her eyes without looking up. "Make it quick, Gerald, and wash your hands properly. I do not want your germs everywhere." I walked as fast as my aching joints would allow down the hallway and into the guest bathroom. I locked the door behind me, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sat on the edge of the toilet and rolled down my sock. There it was, a page torn from a school notebook, folded into a tiny square. My fingers shook as I unfolded it, smoothing out the wrinkles on my knee. The handwriting was hurried, scrawled in blue ink. "Grandpa, Dad rented a storage unit at the harbor. Number 247. You need to see what is inside before Friday. Please go. Everything you think is gone is there." I stared at the paper. Storage Unit 247. The harbor. Why would Bradley rent a storage unit when he claimed he could barely afford the mortgage? And what did Leo mean by "everything I think is gone"? Friday was only 3 days away. Whatever was in that unit was the key to this nightmare. I flushed the toilet to keep up appearances and tucked the note deep into my pocket. In the mirror, my reflection looked back at me. I did not see a frail old man anymore. I saw a man on a mission. The sun rose gray and bleak over Seattle, matching the dread in my stomach. I waited until I heard Monica's SUV pull out of the driveway, followed by Bradley's sedan. The house fell silent, but it was a deceptive peace. I walked to the front door, dressed in my old raincoat, ready to leave for the harbor. I turned the handle. It would not budge. I tried the deadbolt, but it was engaged from the outside. A double-cylinder lock. Monica had not just left for work, she had sealed me in. Panic flared in my chest for a second before the soldier in me took over. I took a deep breath. I had escaped from enemy territory in 1971, and I could certainly escape a suburban colonial house. I knew better than to break a window. Monica had installed a smart security system connected directly to her phone. If a sensor tripped, she would be back in 20 minutes with the police, claiming I was having a violent episode. I had to be a ghost. I went to the downstairs powder room. It was the only room where the window sensor had been faulty for months, a detail I had noticed but never mentioned because nobody ever listened to me anyway. I opened the window sash, slowly wincing as the wood groaned. The gap was small, barely 18 inches wide. 10 years ago, I would have vaulted through. Today, at 74, with 2 bad knees, it was a tactical nightmare. I grabbed a sturdy step stool. I pushed my upper body through the frame, the cold rain instantly soaking my face. I had to wiggle my shoulders through, gasping as the frame dug into my ribs. I fell onto the wet grass outside, landing hard on my side. Pain shot up my hip, but I bit my lip to keep from crying out. I was out. But the danger was not over. Above the garage, the camera lens swept back and forth. I knew its pattern. 10 seconds left. 10 seconds right. I waited in the mud, counting under my breath, just as I used to count mortar rounds. 3, 2, 1. Move. I crawled behind the hydrangeas, my expensive trousers caked in mud, keeping my head low until I reached the blind spot behind the tool shed. I slipped through the back gate and into the alley. I walked for 3 blocks before I dared to stand up straight. I looked like a vagrant, my clothes wet and dirty, my hair plastered to my forehead. People on the street crossed to the other side to avoid me. Let them look. They saw a crazy old man. They did not see a grandfather fighting for his life. I caught the number 40 bus to the industrial district. The ride took an hour. The heater on the bus was broken, and I shivered uncontrollably, my teeth chattering. Every stop felt like an eternity. I kept checking my pocket, making sure the note was still there. Unit 247. When I finally stepped off at the harbor, the smell of salt and diesel fuel hit me. The storage facility was a desolate maze of rusted corrugated metal and concrete. It was the kind of place where secrets went to die. I limped towards the office, my hip burning with every step, but I did not stop. I had to know the truth. The salty, damp air of the harbor stung my eyes as I navigated the maze of corrugated metal containers. The storage facility was a ghost town, guarded only by the crying of seagulls and the distant hum of cranes. My hip was throbbing with a dull, persistent ache after the long walk from the bus stop, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scanned the faded numbers on the rusting doors. 245, 246, and there it was, Unit 247. It looked just like all the others, a cold gray box. But as I stood before it, a wave of nausea rolled over me. A heavy combination lock secured the latch. My hands shook as I reached for it. I did not know the code. I had not thought this far ahead. But then a bitter thought crossed my mind. My son Bradley was not a creative man. He was a creature of habit and cruel irony. I spun the dials to 0412, my late wife Beatrice's birthday. The shackle popped open with a metallic click. The sound echoed in the silence like a gunshot. He used his dead mother's birthday to lock away his secrets. I pulled the lock free and grabbed the handle at the bottom of the door. It was heavy, and the springs groaned in protest as I heaved it upward. The door rattled along the tracks, revealing the interior inch by painful inch. The single bulb from the hallway cast a long yellow beam into the dusty darkness. I waited for my eyes to adjust, hoping against hope that the space would be empty, hoping that my grandson was wrong. But as the shadows retreated, my knees almost gave out. I had to grab the door frame to keep from falling. There it was. Sitting in the center of the concrete floor, gleaming under a layer of dust, was my heart and soul. My 1967 Mustang Shelby GT 500. The Acapulco blue paint still shone in the dim light. I walked toward it like a man in a trance. My hand reached out and touched the cold metal of the hood. I remembered the day 3 years ago when Bradley sat at my kitchen table, tears streaming down his face, telling me we had to sell the car to pay for Beatrice's experimental cancer treatment. I had handed him the keys without hesitation. I told him a car was just a machine, but his mother was everything. He told me he sold it to a collector in Oregon for a fraction of its value because we needed the cash fast. It was a lie, a sick, twisted lie. The car had never left Seattle. He had stolen it from me while his mother lay dying in the hospital. I moved past the car, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Against the back wall, stacked high to the ceiling, were wooden crates and familiar shapes wrapped in moving blankets. I pulled the corner of a blanket down, and a pair of eyes stared back at me. It was the oil portrait of my great-grandfather. I spun around and ripped open a cardboard box. Inside, carefully wrapped in bubble wrap, was my collection of antique maritime clocks. Bradley had told me these were destroyed in the garage fire last winter. I remembered standing in the driveway, watching the smoke, feeling helpless as he told me the wiring had shorted out. He had comforted me while I cried over the loss of my family history. But there had been no accidental fire. He had staged it. He had burned trash to create smoke and then moved my treasures here like a thief in the night. I stood in the middle of that storage unit, surrounded by the ghosts of my past. I was not looking at objects anymore. I was looking at the physical manifestation of my son's hatred. He did not just want my money. He wanted to strip me of everything that made me who I am. He wanted to erase Gerald Sullivan from the earth before I was even in the grave. I leaned against the fender of my stolen car, and for the first time in years, I did not feel old. I felt dangerous. I turned my attention to the far corner of the unit, where a large object sat covered by a heavy canvas dropcloth. It was about the size of a dining table. I gripped the rough fabric and pulled it away in one swift motion, sending a cloud of dust into the stale air. What I saw underneath made my knees buckle. It was a professional architectural model, a pristine miniature world encased in glass. The landscape was unmistakable. The slope of the hill, the position of the old oak trees, the view towards the sound. It was my property. But my house, the Victorian home I had restored with my own hands, was gone. In its place stood a soulless 4-story structure made of glass and steel. It looked like every other generic luxury condo popping up in the city. I leaned in closer, squinting at the tiny gold lettering above the miniature entrance. Monica Heights. The audacity of it punched the air out of my lungs. My daughter-in-law was not just planning to kick me out. She was planning to bulldoze my entire life and build a monument to her own vanity on top of the rubble of my memories. Next to the model lay a stack of crisp manila folders. I opened the top one, labeled Patient Gerald Sullivan. My hands trembled as I read the diagnosis. Advanced Dementia, Level 3. The document claimed I was violent, prone to hallucinations, and unable to care for myself. It listed incidents that never happened. It said I had tried to set fire to the kitchen. It said I had attacked a neighbor. It was a work of pure fiction, signed by a Dr. Thorne, a man I had never met in my life. Under the medical report was a transfer order. Involuntary commitment to Silver Lake Memory Care Facility, effective this Friday. The pieces finally clicked together with terrifying clarity. They did not just want to steal my money. They needed me declared legally incompetent so they could bulldoze the house. If I was in a state facility, medicated into oblivion, I could not object to the demolition. I could not stop the sale. I looked at the date on the transfer order. Friday at 9 in the morning. That was their deadline. That was when the moving van would arrive, not to take me to a new home, but to a prison. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I had in the trenches 50 years ago when the enemy was closing in. They thought they were dealing with a confused old man who would go quietly into the night. They had no idea they had just declared war on a logistics expert who knew how to dismantle an operation piece by piece. I took photos of the model and the documents with my phone, ensuring every lie was documented. Then I tucked the medical file into my jacket. I was not going to Silver Lake. I was going home to set a trap. I left the cold, damp storage unit and hailed a taxi, my hands still clutching the stolen medical files inside my jacket. My destination was a brick building downtown that smelled of old paper and mahogany. Mitchell had been my lawyer and my friend for 40 years, ever since we served in the same platoon. He was the only person left in this world I could trust. When I walked into his office, he did not smile. He did not offer me coffee or ask about the weather. He looked at me with eyes full of pity and anger and simply pointed to the leather chair across from his desk. "Gerald," he said, his voice heavy. "I am glad you came. I tried to call you 3 times last month, but your son told me you were too sick to speak. He said you did not recognize anyone anymore." I sat down, feeling the weight of his words. They had been isolating me, cutting off my lifelines one by one. I placed the fake medical records on his desk. "They are planning to commit me on Friday, Mitchell, but that is not the worst part. I need you to look at my finances. All of them." Mitchell nodded grimly. He opened a thick file folder that was already sitting on his blotter. He spread the documents out like a winning poker hand that nobody wanted to play. "I pulled these this morning after your grandson texted me from a burner phone," Mitchell said. "You need to brace yourself, Gerald. It is bad." He slid a bank statement toward me. It was for my primary pension fund, the account where I had saved every bonus, every overtime check for 30 years to ensure I would never be a burden to my family. The balance at the bottom should have been over $400,000. Instead, it read 0.00. I felt the room spin. Gone. Every cent. "How?" I whispered, my throat dry. "How could they touch it? That account requires my signature in person." Mitchell slid another document across the desk. It was a durable power of attorney granting Bradley full control over my assets. It was dated October 12th of last year. I stared at the signature at the bottom. It looked like mine, but shaky, weak. A forgery. "I was in the hospital that day," I said, my voice rising. "I was having my hip replacement surgery. I was under anesthesia." "Exactly," Mitchell replied. "And look who notarized it. A woman named Sarah Jenkins. That is Monica's college roommate. They forged your signature while you were unconscious and used it to drain the accounts. But they did not stop there. He flipped over the deed to my house, the house I had paid off in 1998. There is a second mortgage, Gerald. They took out a high-interest loan against the equity for $500,000. The money was deposited into a shell company called Sullivan Consulting, which is registered solely in Monica's name. I sat back in the chair, unable to breathe. It was not just greed. It was a slaughter. They had stripped me of my past, my future, and my home. They had turned my life's work into a slush fund for their vanity. "We have enough to send them to prison for 20 years, Mitchell said, his hand resting on the phone. "I can call the district attorney right now." "No," I said, standing up. My knees did not hurt anymore. The rage was a powerful anesthetic. "Not yet. They have my grandson. If we call the police now, Monica might hurt him or destroy the evidence in the house. We do this my way. I am going back there, Mitchell, and I am going to let them think they have won. Until Friday." Mitchell placed a second stack of documents in front of me, and the weight of the paper hit the desk with a thud that echoed in the silent office. We had already seen the theft of the house and the pension, but what came next was not just financial fraud. It was a dismantling of my son's soul. For years, Bradley had told me his logistics startup was failing because of the economy. He would come home with slumped shoulders, complaining about supply chain disruptions and unfair tariffs. I believed him. I even dipped into my savings to help him make payroll, because that is what a father does. But as I looked at the credit card statements Mitchell highlighted in yellow, the truth made me sick to my stomach. There were no payments to suppliers. There were no office rent checks. Instead, there were page after page of transactions for online gambling sites. Lucky Star, Royal Flush Poker, Bet365. Thousands of dollars disappearing at 2 a.m. while his wife and son slept upstairs. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I was not in a lawyer's office. I was back in the backyard of our old house 35 years ago. Bradley was 10 years old. He had accidentally broken Mrs. Higgins' window with a baseball. He was terrified, but he marched next door, rang her bell, and offered to mow her lawn for a month to pay for it. I remembered the pride I felt that day. I remembered tousling his hair and telling him that a Sullivan always takes responsibility. I opened my eyes, and the image of that honest little boy shattered against the reality of the man who stole my heart medication money to play blackjack on his phone. But the betrayal went deeper. Mitchell flipped to the next page. "Look at these transfers, Gerald. $2,000 a month to an account named Veronica Miller. And look at this lease agreement for a studio apartment on the East Side." I stared at the name. Veronica. It was not Monica. My daughter-in-law, the woman who terrorized me over the price of roast beef, had no idea her husband was spending our family fortune on a mistress. Bradley was not just a victim of Monica's cruelty. He was a villain in his own right. He was playing the role of the henpecked husband at home, letting Monica take the lead on abusing me, while he siphoned off the money she thought she controlled to fund a secret life of vice. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the Seattle rain. I had spent so long making excuses for him, telling myself he was just weak or influenced by a bad wife. But he was not weak. He was rotten. The son I raised had died a long time ago, leaving behind this hollow shell of a man who would sell his own father for a spin on a roulette wheel. I looked up at Mitchell and wiped a single tear from my cheek. The grief was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. If Bradley wanted to gamble with his life, he was about to learn that the house always wins. And this time, I was the house. Mitchell looked at me like I was insane. He held the phone in his hand, his thumb hovering over the dial button. "Gerald, listen to reason. We have them. We have the bank records, the fake medical reports, the proof of the affair. I can end this nightmare right now with one call to the district attorney. Why put yourself back in the line of fire? You are 74 years old. You are not a soldier anymore. I stood up and buttoned my coat, hiding the evidence against my chest. Because, Mitchell, they have my grandson. If the police show up now, Monica will know Leo warned me. She is vindictive. She will hurt that boy, or manipulate the system to keep him away from me. She will claim I brainwashed him. And besides, I do not just want them arrested. I want them to feel what I felt. I want them to be publicly exposed in front of the very people they are trying to impress. I want my dignity back. And I can only get that by facing them down. Mitchell sighed and lowered the phone. You are a stubborn old mule, he grumbled. But he was smiling, a sad, nostalgic smile. Be careful, Gerald. If you miss your check-in on Friday morning, I am sending the cavalry. The ride back to the suburbs felt shorter than the ride out. My adrenaline was fading, replaced by the deep aches of an old body pushed too far. I had the taxi drop me off 2 blocks away, so no one would see a commercial vehicle near the driveway. I crept through the neighbors' hedges, praying Mrs. Higgins was not watching from her window. The house was still silent. The powder room window was still ajar just as I had left it. Getting out had been hard, but getting back in was torture. I had to hoist my dead weight up, scraping my shins against the brick. I tumbled onto the bathroom floor, gasping for air, my heart fluttering like a trapped moth. I checked my watch. 4:30. Monica would be home in 15 minutes. I worked fast. I wiped the mud from the windowsill and locked it, ensuring the latch clicked softly. I hid my wet raincoat at the very back of the hall closet, behind the winter coats nobody used. I went to my room and hid the file of evidence inside the lining of my old armchair, a trick I learned during my service days. Then I changed into my pajamas and messed up my hair. I sat in the living room staring blankly at the television, just as the garage door rumbled open. The sound was like a dragon waking up. I heard Monica's heels clicking on the hardwood floor. My pulse spiked, but I forced my breathing to slow. When she walked into the room, I did not look up. I let my mouth hang open slightly, feigning the vacant look she was so used to seeing. "Oh, good, you are still alive," she said, tossing her keys on the counter without even looking at me. "I hope you did not eat anything while I was gone. We are having leftovers tonight, and I am not cooking twice." I mumbled something incoherent, and she smirked, walking past me without a second glance. She had no idea that the confused old man in the chair was currently holding the detonator to her entire life. And I was just waiting for the right moment to press the button. The man Monica brought into the living room did not carry a medical bag or wear a stethoscope. He wore a suit that was slightly too shiny and smelled of stale tobacco covered by cheap cologne. She introduced him as Dr. Thorne, a specialist who she claimed was doing a house call as a special favor to the family. I knew better the moment I looked into his eyes. They were not the eyes of a healer. They were the cold, calculating eyes of a shark sensing blood in the water. This was not a medical exam. It was an audition for my own insanity, and I had to play the starring role perfectly if I wanted to survive until Friday. Thorne sat on the edge of the sofa and placed a small black digital recorder on the coffee table between us. The tiny red light began to blink rhythmically, like a warning beacon. He clicked a gold pen and opened a fresh notebook, ignoring the fact that I was staring right at him. Monica stood in the corner, her arms crossed, her face set in a mask of fake concern that barely hid her anticipation. "Mr. Sullivan, can you tell me what year it is?" Thorne asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I knew exactly what year it was. I knew the date, the time, and the current interest rate of the Federal Reserve. but I let my jaw go slack. I allowed my eyes to glaze over, as if I were trying to see through a heavy fog. I looked past him at the wall. "Is it 1998? I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "Is Beatrice coming home for dinner soon?" I heard Monica let out a soft, satisfied exhale. She was enjoying this. Thorne made a dramatic show of writing something down in his notebook. He did not correct me. He wanted me to be wrong. "Let us talk about the incidents." Gerald Thorne continued, leaning forward. "Monica tells me you have been seeing things. Fire in the garage, people stealing your money. Do you feel like people are out to get you?" This was the trap. If I denied it and got angry, I would look paranoid and aggressive. If I admitted it, I was hallucinating. I had to thread the needle. I looked down at my hands, twisting my wedding ring. "I do not know," I mumbled, looking specifically at his shoes. "Sometimes the numbers on the paper move. Sometimes the car is there, and then it is not. I just want to go for a drive." Thorne smiled. It was a thin, reptilian smile. He looked over his shoulder at Monica and nodded. Then he turned back to me for the final nail in the coffin. "Do you think you can take care of yourself, Gerald? Or do you think it might be time to go somewhere where the nurses can help you with the confusion?" I slumped deeper into my chair, making myself look smaller, physically shrinking under the weight of their conspiracy. "I am tired," I said simply. "I am so tired of the noise." Thorne clicked the recorder off. "Well, Mrs. Sullivan, I think the clinical picture is undeniable. Advanced dementia with paranoid delusions. He is clearly unable to make financial or legal decisions. I will have the commitment papers for Silver Lake finalized for Friday morning. It is the humane thing to do." They shook hands right in front of me, sealing the deal over my living body. They thought I was too far gone to understand the transaction that had just taken place. But as Thorne gathered his things, he made a mistake. He winked at Monica. It was a quick, dirty, conspiratorial wink. Doctors do not wink at family members after diagnosing a tragedy. Accomplices do. I sat there, watching my executioner leave, knowing that while he had his recording, I had my own memory. And my memory was going to be their downfall. The house was quiet, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. I was thirsty, so I shuffled towards the kitchen, my socks sliding silently on the hardwood floor. I stopped just before the archway when I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. It was the rhythmic grinding of a pestle against a mortar. I pressed myself against the wall and peered around the corner. Monica was standing at the granite island, her back to me. On the counter lay a blister pack of blue pills I had never seen before. They were certainly not my blood pressure medication, and they were not aspirin. She was crushing them into a fine powder with a focus that was terrifying to watch. I held my breath as she swept the blue dust into a mug of steaming milk. She stirred it vigorously, the spoon clinking against the ceramic, masking the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. This was not caregiving. This was chemistry. She was brewing a cocktail designed to keep me docile, to turn me into the vegetable she claimed I was. I quickly retreated back to my recliner and slumped down, closing my eyes, just as her footsteps approached the living room. "Gerald?" she said, her voice uncharacteristically soft, almost maternal. "I brought you something. Warm milk with a little honey to help you rest. You have had a big day with the doctor, and you need to sleep soundly tonight." I opened my eyes and looked at the mug she was holding out. Steam rose from it, carrying the faint, sweet scent of warm dairy. But underneath I could smell something metallic. I reached out with a trembling hand, taking the mug. It was warm against my cold palms. "Thank you, Monica," I whispered, playing the part. You are too good to me. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the mug, waiting for me to take the first sip. Drink it all down, she urged. It will make the bad dreams go away. I brought the cup to my lips. My survival instinct screamed at me to throw it in her face. I knew what this was. In the service, we called it a chemical restraint. A paralytic or a heavy sedative meant to knock a man out for 12 hours so he could not fight back. She needed me out cold so she could prepare for the auction, or maybe just because she was tired of looking at me. I took a tiny sip, letting the liquid touch my lips but not swallowing. It tasted chalky and bitter. It is hot, I said, lowering the mug. I will let it cool for a minute. Do not wait too long, she said, her voice hardening slightly. It works best when it is warm. I will be in the kitchen cleaning up. I expect that cup to be empty when I come back to check on you. She turned and walked away. I stared into the frothy white liquid. It was a weapon in a ceramic mug. I had to get rid of it, but she was watching the kitchen entrance. I was trapped in my chair, holding my own poison, and time was running out. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 2, but sleep was a distant memory. I lay in the dark, listening to the rain hammer against the window pane, my heart still racing from the scene in the living room. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Monica's hand connecting with Leo's face. I felt a crushing weight of guilt pressing down on my chest. I was supposed to be the protector of this family. But instead, my 12-year-old grandson was taking physical blows to shield me. I gripped the sheets, my knuckles white in the darkness, praying for a chance to make things right. Suddenly the doorknob turned. It was a slow, agonizing creak that made me sit bolt upright. I reached for the heavy brass lamp on my nightstand, thinking Monica or Bradley had come to finish the job they started with the drugged milk. But then a small shadow slipped through the crack. Grandpa came, the whisper soft and trembling. It is me. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding and lowered the lamp. Leo, come here, son. He rushed across the room, his bare feet silent on the carpet. I pulled back the duvet and he climbed onto the edge of the bed, just like he used to when he was 5 and afraid of thunderstorms. But he was not 5 anymore. As the moonlight filtered through the curtains, it illuminated the angry purple bruise blooming on his left cheek. I reached out to touch it, but stopped my hand hovering in the air, afraid to cause him more pain. I am so sorry, Leo. I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. I should have stopped her. I should have done something. Leo shook his head vigorously, wiping his runny nose on his sleeve. No, Grandpa. If you had stood up, she would have called the police. She was waiting for you to get aggressive so she could have you committed tonight. I saw her texting Dr. Thorne right before dinner. We needed more time. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight. He felt so small and fragile in my arms, but his courage was giant. We sat there for a long time, 2 soldiers in a foxhole surrounded by enemies. Eventually, he pulled back, sniffing. Grandpa, there is something else, he said, his voice dropping even lower. I heard them talking in the garage while you were in the bathroom. It is about Friday. I stiffened. I know about Silver Lake, Leo. I know they are sending me away. No, it is not just that. The van is coming for you at 9 in the morning. But the auction starts at 6 in the evening, right here, in the house. He took a shuddering breath and continued. Mom has invited a bunch of people. Not regular people. She called them private collectors. She is turning the living room into a showroom. She told Dad that once you are gone, she is selling everything. The Mustang, the paintings, the clocks, even your war medals, Grandpa. She said she wants the house cleared out by Saturday so the demolition crew can start on Monday. The blood roared in my ears. They were not even waiting for my body to be cold. They were going to strip my life for parts the moment I was out the door. A black market auction in my own living room. It was evil, but it was also a mistake. A massive, arrogant mistake. Leo listened to me carefully, I said, gripping his shoulders. You did good. You did incredible. But now, I need you to be brave for 2 more days. Can you do that? He nodded, his eyes fierce. What are we going to do? I looked at the bruise on his face, and then at the determination in his eyes. We are not going to do anything, I whispered. We are going to let the auction happen. We are going to let them set the stage. And then, when the curtain goes up, we are going to give them a show they will never forget. Go back to bed now, and lock your door. He slid off the bed and disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone with the rain. I lay back down, but this time I smiled. Monica wanted a full house for her big event. Well, she was going to get one. I just needed to make sure the guest list included a few people she wasn't expecting. After Leo slipped back into the shadows of the hallway, I waited a full 10 minutes counting the seconds in my head, just as I had done on patrol decades ago. The house settled into a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane. I reached under my mattress, my fingers searching until they brushed against cold plastic. It was a cheap prepaid smartphone that Leo had bought with his allowance money and hidden there earlier. It was a burner phone, the kind drug dealers used in movies. But tonight, it was my only lifeline to the outside world. I turned the brightness down to the lowest setting and pulled the blanket over my head, creating a small tent of privacy. I dialed Mitchell's personal number. He answered on the first ring, his voice alert and sharp. He had been waiting. Report, he said simply. The mission has changed, Mitchell, I whispered into the microphone. We are not just looking at fraud anymore. We are looking at a black market liquidation. They are holding an illegal auction right here in the living room on Friday night. They are bringing everything from the storage unit to the house. There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of a pen scratching rapidly on paper. That is bold, Mitchell said. They are moving stolen goods across city lines and selling them without provenance. If we catch them in the act, it is a federal crime. Do you want me to send the police to the storage unit now to intercept them? No, I said firmly. My mind was racing, connecting logistics chains and timelines. If we stop them at the unit, they will claim it was a mistake. But Gerald, are you sure you can handle 2 more days in there? If they suspect you are lucid, they might escalate. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the phone. I did not see a victim. I saw a man who had survived war and loss and heartbreak. I can handle them, I said. Because they are not fighting Gerald Sullivan, the helpless grandfather. They are fighting a ghost. And ghosts are very good at haunting people. I ended the call and hid the phone inside the lining of my pillowcase. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. I was not trapped in this house with them. They were trapped in this house with me. I closed my eyes and forced myself to sleep. I needed every ounce of strength for the performance of a lifetime. The stage was set. The actors were in place, and I was about to rewrite their ending. After Leo slipped back into the shadows of the hallway, I waited a full 10 minutes, counting the seconds in my head. Just as I had done on patrol decades ago. The house settled into a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window pane. I reached under my mattress, my fingers searching until they brushed against cold plastic. It was a cheap prepaid smartphone that Leo had bought with his allowance money and hidden there earlier. It was a burner phone, the kind drug dealers used in movies. But tonight, it was my only lifeline to the outside world. I turned the brightness down to the lowest setting and pulled the blanket over my head, creating a small tent of privacy. I dialed Mitchell's personal number. He answered on the first ring, his voice alert and sharp. He had been waiting. "Report," he said simply. "The mission has changed, Mitchell," I whispered into the microphone. "We are not just looking at fraud anymore. We are looking at a black market liquidation. They are holding an There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of a pen scratching rapidly on paper. "That is bold," Mitchell said. "They are moving stolen goods across city lines and selling them without provenance. If we catch them in the act, it is a federal crime. Do you want me to send the police to the storage unit now to intercept them?" "No," I said firmly. My mind was racing, connecting logistics chains and timelines. If we stop them at the unit, they will claim it was a mistake. They will claim they were just moving things for safekeeping. We need them to commit the act. We need them to bring the stolen property into this house and try to sell it. We are going to execute the Trojan horse protocol. I could practically hear Mitchell smiling. "I need video proof of who loads the truck. And I need a tail on that vehicle every inch of the way to my driveway. And Mitchell, I need you to prepare a team to breach the house on my signal Friday night." "Consider it done," Mitchell replied. "But Gerald, are you sure you can handle 2 more days in there? If they suspect you are loose..." The stage was set, the actors were in place, and I was about to rewrite their ending. The next morning played out exactly as Mitchell had predicted. When we rolled up the door to Unit 247, we wiped down every surface we touched, leaving no fingerprints. As we lowered the metal door, hiding my treasures back in the dark, I felt a strange sense of peace. The bait was set, the hook was sharp, and the fish were already swimming toward the line. I got back in the van, ready to return to my prison cell of a bedroom and wait for the show to begin. I just hoped Leo could hold on for 1 more day. The walk from the corner where Mitchell's surveillance van dropped me off felt longer than a 10-mile march. It was not because of my bad hip or the damp Seattle chill, but because of the psychological weight of what I was about to do. I had to shed the skin of the tactical commander I had been for the last few hours and put back on the mask of the confused, dying old man. I stood on the porch for a moment, taking a deep breath of wet air and letting my shoulders slump. I loosened my jaw and let a vacant look settle into my eyes. Then I opened the front door and shuffled inside, dragging my feet heavily against the hardwood floor. Bradley was sitting on the sofa, staring at his phone, with that intense, desperate look he always had when he was losing money. He did not even look up when I entered. He just sighed loudly, a sound of pure irritation that I was still breathing and taking up space in his house. I walked over to my recliner and collapsed into it, letting my cane clatter noisily against the side table. "Bradley," I wheezed, forcing a dry, rattling cough from my chest. "Bradley, look at me, son." He finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What is it now, Dad? I am busy handling business. Do not tell me you wet yourself again, because I am not cleaning it up." I shook my head slowly, my hands trembling on the armrests. "No, it is not that." I saw her last night, Bradley. I saw your mother. She was standing right there by the window, wearing that blue dress she loved. She was calling me. Bradley rolled his eyes and went back to his phone. You are hallucinating again. Mom has been dead for 10 years. Take a nap. I leaned forward, acting as if his dismissal did not hurt. I know she is gone, but I am ready to go too. I am so tired of fighting. I am tired of the confusion and the noise. I do not want to wait until Friday to settle things. I paused, waiting for his attention to drift back to me. When I spoke next, my voice was clear and deliberate despite the act. I want to sign the will, Bradley. I want to sign the papers to give you and Monica everything. The house, the accounts, the cars. I want to do it tonight so I can go to Silver Lake with a clean slate. I just want to be with Beatrice. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if I had cast a magic spell. But it was not Bradley who reacted first. From the kitchen doorway, I heard the sharp intake of breath. Monica. She had been listening the whole time, hovering like a vulture waiting for a carcass. She walked into the living room, but her stride was different now. The hostility was gone, replaced by a sickeningly sweet performance of concern. She sat down on the coffee table right in front of me and took my cold hand in hers. Her palms were sweaty. "Oh, Dad," she cooed, her voice pitching up an octave. "You are sounding so lucid right now. Are you sure that is what you want? We just want what is best for you." I looked into her eyes and saw the greed dancing there like a flame. She was mentally counting the money already. She was imagining the bulldozers flattening my home. "Yes, Monica," I whispered, squeezing her hand weakly. "Call the lawyer. Bring the papers. I want to give my son his inheritance while I can still hold a pen." Monica looked at Bradley and nodded frantically, her eyes wide with excitement. Bradley finally smiled. It was a greedy, relieved smile that made my stomach turn. They thought I was surrendering. They had no idea I was handing them a pen to sign their own confession. I reached into the deep pocket of my wool cardigan, my hand trembling theatrically as I withdrew the document Mitchell had prepared earlier that day. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored paper that crinkled loudly in the silent room. I unfolded it slowly, making them wait, making them lean in. It was not a legal will yet, but a draft of intent. I smoothed it out on the coffee table, my finger tracing the bold paragraph in the center. "Read it, Bradley," I wheezed. "Read what it says about the primary beneficiary." Bradley snatched the paper, his eyes scanning the legal jargon frantically. He mumbled the words under his breath until he hit the clause we had planted. "I hereby bequeath my entire estate, including the property at Oak Creek, the vintage vehicle collection, and all liquid assets, to the individual who provides me with the most comfort and care during my final transition." The room went deadly silent. I saw the gears turning in Monica's head. She looked at the date on the paper. It was today's date. She looked at me, and then she looked at the transfer papers for Silver Lake that were hiding in her purse. If she sent me away on Friday morning, she would be abandoning me. If she treated me like garbage, she would be violating the terms of the inheritance. But if she was the angel of mercy, she would get everything. The transformation was terrifyingly instant. The sneer vanished from her face, replaced by a look of wide-eyed solicitude that was almost comical. She practically shoved Bradley out of the way. "Oh, Dad," she gasped, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "You really want to make sure we are taken care of, do you not? That is so sweet.
I have been telling Bradley for months that we need to make you more comfortable here." She turned to her husband, snapping her fingers. "Bradley, put that phone away. Can you not see your father is parched? Go get him a bottle of sparkling water."
The expensive kind. Then she turned back to me, smoothing the blanket over my knees. "You look hungry, Dad. I made a fresh pot of mushroom soup for dinner. I was just about to bring you a bowl." "Forget about that oatmeal nonsense. You need strength." She ran to the kitchen. I sat there watching Bradley scurry to the fridge like a frightened waiter. Minutes later, Monica returned with a steaming bowl of creamy soup on a silver tray. She sat on the edge of the coffee table and dipped the spoon, blowing on it gently. "Here, open wide," she said, smiling so hard her makeup cracked. "Let me help you." I opened my mouth and let her feed me. The soup was delicious, rich and seasoned perfectly. But what I really savored was the taste of her desperation. She was feeding the man she planned to destroy, waiting on me hand and foot, because she thought she was buying a ticket to a fortune. I swallowed the spoonful and gave her a grateful nod. "You are an angel, Monica," I whispered. She beamed, unaware that she was feeding the enemy. She was so busy securing her inheritance that she did not notice I was gathering my strength. Every calorie she fed me was fuel for the fire I was going to rain down on her in 48 hours. I ate every drop. After Monica tucked me in with a kiss on the forehead that felt like the kiss of Judas, I lay in the dark waiting. I counted to 500, letting the house settle. The heavy meal and the performance of the loving daughter-in-law had exhausted her, but I knew Bradley was wide awake. I could hear his heavy footsteps pacing in the master bedroom down the hall. He was seething. The bait I had planted in the fake will was doing exactly what I intended. It was turning the two conspirators against each other. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the cheap burner phone Leo had hidden for me. I moved silently to my door, pressing it open just a crack. The hallway was empty. I crept towards their bedroom, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. The door was slightly ajar, and voices were leaking out, rising in volume with every second. I pressed the record button on the phone and held it close to the gap in the door frame. "You are enjoying this, are you not?" Bradley's voice slurred slightly, indicating he had been drinking again. "You are loving the fact that he wrote your name on that paper and not mine." "He is my father, Monica. It is my inheritance." "Oh, shut up, Bradley," Monica hissed back. Her voice was sharp and dismissive. "Do not act like you care about him now. You were ready to throw him in the van to Silver Lake this morning. I am the one doing the heavy lifting here. I am the one feeding him, wiping his mouth, and pretending to listen to his senile ramblings. If I have to play the nurse to get the house, then I earn the house." I watched the audio waveform on my phone screen spike as Bradley raised his voice. "You do not earn anything," he shouted. "We are in this together, remember? Or did you forget who lit the match in the garage last year? I burned half my childhood memories to help us move that stuff to the storage unit. I took the risk while you sat in the car keeping watch. I held my breath. There it was, the confession. He had just admitted to the arson and the theft on tape. But Monica was not done digging their grave. "Lower your voice, you idiot," she snapped. "And do not talk to me about risk. Who forged the signature on the power of attorney? Me. Who talked to the bank manager and transferred his pension fund to your gambling account so you would not get your legs broken by loan sharks? Me. I saved your life, Bradley. So if your father wants to leave the rest of the estate to his favorite caregiver, then you better hope I keep putting on a good show. Because without me,
You are just a bankrupt loser with a gambling addiction. I heard the sound of glass shattering. Bradley had thrown something.
You are a witch, Monica, he spat.
And you are a parasite, she countered, cold and deadly. Now go sleep on the couch. I need my rest. I have a dying old man to charm in the morning. I stopped the recording and saved the file, sending a backup copy immediately to Mitchell's encrypted server. My hand was shaking, but not from age. It was shaking with the thrill of victory. In 3 minutes of jealous bickering, they had given me everything I needed to put them away for 20 years. They thought they were fighting over who got the spoils of war. They did not realize they were just arguing over who would get the top bunk in the prison cell. I crept back to my room feeling lighter than I had in years. The trap was not just set. It had already snapped shut. I turned away from the bedroom door, clutching the cheap plastic phone against my chest like a shield. I had the confession. I had the proof. All I had to do was make it back to my room and upload the file to the secure server.
But fate is a cruel mistress. As I took my first step, the floorboard under my left foot groaned. It was a loud, dry crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silent hallway. The argument inside the bedroom stopped instantly. Before I could take another step, the door was yanked open. Bradley stood there, framed by the light from the room. His shirt was unbuttoned, and his face was flushed red with alcohol and rage. He looked down at me, and then his eyes locked onto the faint blue glow emanating from my hand. I had forgotten to lock the screen. The recording app was still visible. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice slurred but dangerous. "What do you have there, old man?" I tried to hide the phone behind my back, stepping away. "Nothing, Bradley," I stammered. "I was just looking for the bathroom. I got confused." He did not buy it. He lunged forward with a speed I did not think he possessed. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it hard. I cried out in pain as my arthritis flared up, but I refused to let go. We struggled in the hallway, a grotesque dance between a father and son. "Give it to me," he roared. He wrenched my fingers back, and the phone slipped from my grasp. He looked at the screen. Voice memo saved. Duration 3 minutes. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and terrified. Then the terror turned into pure, unadulterated fury. "You were recording us," he whispered. "You sneaky old rat. You are not sick at all, are you?" He raised the phone high above his head and smashed it down onto the hardwood floor. Plastic and glass shattered, sending pieces skittering across the hall. My lifeline was gone. But he was not done. The violence in him had been unleashed. He shoved me hard with both hands. I flew backward, my feet tangling in the hallway runner. I hit the floor hard, landing on my bad hip. A bolt of white-hot pain shot up my spine, stealing the breath from my lungs. I lay there gasping, staring up at the man I had raised. He loomed over me, his fists clenched, his breathing ragged. For the first time in my life, I looked at my son, and I did not see a disappointment. I saw a threat. I saw a man who had crossed the line from greed to violence, and there was no going back. He knew now. The mask was off, and I was lying on the floor at his mercy. I tried to rise, but a bolt of agony shot through my hip, pinning me to the floor. Bradley stood over me, his chest heaving, his eyes black with violence. He raised his boot, ready to kick me while I was down. I braced myself for the impact, closing my eyes. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard a guttural scream from my son.
I opened my eyes to see Leo. My 12-year-old grandson had launched himself out of the darkness of the doorway. He did not have the size to fight a grown man, but he had the desperation of a child watching his world collapse.
He had latched onto Bradley's wrist, sinking his teeth deep into the flesh right above the watch band. Bradley howled in pain, swinging his arm wildly. "Get off me, you little psycho!" he shouted. He thrashed hard, finally dislodging the boy. Leo went flying across the narrow hallway, crashing shoulder first into the wall. But he did not cry. He scrambled back to his feet, instantly placing his small body between me and his father. He stood with his arms spread wide, a human shield, trembling but refusing to move. "Leave him alone!" Leo screamed, his voice cracking. "Do not touch him!" Before Bradley could retaliate, Monica stormed out of the bedroom. She saw the broken phone on the floor. She saw her husband bleeding, and she saw her son defying them. She did not ask what happened. She simply chose a side, and it was not ours. She lunged forward, her silk robe billowing like the wings of a bat. She grabbed Leo, not by the arm, but by the back of his pajama collar, yanking him backward so hard he choked. "You ungrateful little brat," she hissed, her face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. "We feed you, we clothe you, and this is how you repay us, by attacking your own father." She began to drag him down the hallway. Leo kicked and flailed, his socks slipping on the hardwood, but he was no match for her fury. I tried to crawl after them, dragging my useless leg behind me, clawing at the floorboards with my fingernails until they bled. "Monica, no!" I begged, my voice weak and raspy. "Let him go. He is just a boy. Please." She ignored me completely. She dragged him to the heavy oak door that led to the unfinished basement. She threw it open and shoved him into the cold darkness. Leo stumbled down the first few steps, grabbing the railing to keep from falling. He turned back, his face wet with tears, looking at me one last time before Monica slammed the door shut. "You stay down there until I sell every last piece of junk in this house," she screamed through the wood. "If I hear one peep out of you, I will leave you there for the new owners to find." Then came the sound that broke me, the loud mechanical click of the deadbolt sliding home. She turned to me, breathing hard, adjusting her hair as if she had just taken out the trash. "As for you, Gerald," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "you are going back to your room, and if you try to leave again, I will make sure Leo stays in that basement a lot longer than 2 days. Now get up." I lay on the floor, listening to my grandson sobbing softly on the other side of the door. My physical pain was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They had made a fatal error. They thought they had imprisoned us, but by locking Leo up, they had taken away the only thing holding me back. I was not playing for safety anymore. I was playing for revenge. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed through the bedroom like a gunshot, sealing my fate. I dragged myself up from the floor, my hip throbbing with a dull, sickening rhythm that matched the pounding of the rain against the roof. I limped toward the door and tried the handle even though I knew it was useless. It was locked tight. I was a prisoner in the very room where I had slept for 30 years. I turned toward the window, hoping for a reprieve, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could signal a neighbor or squeeze through the frame again. But as I pulled back the heavy velvet curtains, my heart sank into my stomach. 2 fresh planks of rough, unpainted wood were nailed across the exterior frame. Through the narrow gaps, I could see the gray Seattle sky weeping,
but I could not get out. Bradley had been busy while Monica dragged Leo to the basement. He had sealed the perimeter. There would be no escape this time. I sat on the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. The room felt suddenly small, suffocating. The silence was absolute, and it was terrifying.
Just an hour ago, I had a plan. I had a phone. I had a connection to the outside world. Now the phone was a pile of plastic shards in the hallway, and my connection to Mitchell was severed. He was out there, waiting for a signal that would never come. If I did not contact him by tomorrow morning, would he send the police? Or would he assume I had simply fallen asleep or lost my nerve? The uncertainty gnawed at me. But the physical confinement was nothing compared to the torture of my own thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Leo's face as he was shoved into the darkness. My grandson was alone in a cold, unfinished basement because he tried to save me. Was he warm enough? Was he injured from the fall? The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I had dragged an innocent child into a war zone, and now he was a casualty. I paced the room, counting my steps. 12 paces from the window to the door. 12 paces back. The shadows lengthened as afternoon faded into evening. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear any sound from the rest of the house. I heard muffled thuds and the scraping of furniture. They were moving things. They were setting up for the auction. My living room was being transformed into a showroom for stolen goods, and I was powerless to stop it. I looked at the bedside table, where a glass of water sat stale and gathering dust. I realized with a jolt of panic that I had no food, no medicine, and no water besides what was in that glass. They were not just locking me in, they were starving me out. They wanted me weak and pliable for Friday morning. Despair began to creep in, cold and insidious. Maybe I was just a foolish old man. Maybe I had overplayed my hand. I sat in the gathering dark, feeling the walls closing in. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly and utterly alone. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain against the boarded-up window. I lay on the floor next to the baseboard, staring at the old cast-iron radiator. It was a relic from the 1920s, painted over a dozen times, peeling and ugly. But as I stared at the pipe disappearing through the floorboards, a spark of memory ignited in the darkness of my mind. That pipe did not just go into the floor. It went straight down. It passed through the dining room wall and terminated in the boiler room in the basement. The very same basement where my grandson was currently locked up. I dragged myself closer to the wall, ignoring the fire in my hip. I pulled off my heavy gold wedding ring, the one Beatrice had placed on my finger 50 years ago. It was thick and solid. I pressed my ear against the cold metal of the pipe and listened. Nothing but the faint hiss of steam. I took a deep breath and struck the ring against the iron pipe. Clink, clink, clink. Pause. Clink. Pause. Clink, clink, clink. Sauce. I waited. The silence stretched out for 10 seconds, then 20. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe the insulation was too thick. Maybe Leo was asleep, or worse, unconscious from the fall. Maybe he was just too scared to notice a faint tapping in a house full of scary noises. I clenched my jaw and tried again, harder this time. Clink. Long pause. Clink, clink, clink. Long pause. Clink. low. I remembered this summer 2 years ago, when we sat on the back porch with a flashlight. I taught him Morse code, telling him it was a secret language that soldiers used when they could not speak. He had been fascinated memorizing the alphabet in a week, tapping messages on the dinner table until Monica yelled at him to stop. I prayed he remembered. I prayed that the game we played was now the lifeline that would save us. Then it happened. Faint but unmistakable. A rhythmic tapping traveled up the metal spine of the house and vibrated against my ear. Tap. Tap, tap. Tap. R. Received. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and fast. He was there. He was listening. We were not isolated anymore. We were a network. I wiped my face and began to tap out the plan. It was a slow, agonizing conversation. Every letter took time, every word a labor of patience. T-O-O-L-S. I waited. Y-E-S, came the reply. H-I-N-G-E-S. I knew the basement door opened outward into the hallway, but the hinges were exposed on the inside. It was a flaw in the old construction I had never bothered to fix. If Leo could find a screwdriver or even a stiff putty knife in my old workbench, he could pop the pins out. He could simply lift the door out of the frame without ever touching the lock. W-H-E-N. Leo tapped back. I thought about the timeline. Monica and Bradley were downstairs right now, moving furniture, drinking wine, celebrating their victory. If Leo made noise now, they would hear him. We needed cover. We needed distraction. Nody, I tapped. What for no? I told him to wait until the auction was in full swing tomorrow evening. When the house was full of people and music and voices. That would be his moment. He tapped back a single solid beat. Understood. I leaned back against the wall, clutching my wedding ring. The despair that had choked me an hour ago was gone. In its place was a cold, focused determination. We were communicating right under their noses. The radiator pipe was our telegraph line, and my 12-year-old grandson was our demolition expert. I closed my eyes and listened to the rain, no longer feeling like a prisoner. I was a commander, waiting for 0 hour. The rumble of a heavy diesel engine cut through the silence of the night, shaking the floorboards beneath my feet. It was late Thursday, and the enemy supply line had finally arrived. I dragged myself to the boarded window, peering through the narrow crack between the planks. A large, unmarked box truck was backing into my driveway, its backup alarm beeping a relentless rhythm that sounded like a countdown. They were moving the inventory. My inventory. For the next 2 hours, I sat in the dark, listening to the systematic dismantling of my life. I heard the heavy thud of boots on the stairs, the screech of furniture being dragged across hardwood, and the distinctive metallic clanking of my maritime clocks being unpacked. They were not just storing items. They were staging a production. My living room, the place where I had raised my son and nursed my dying wife, was being transformed into a high-end showroom for a black market bazaar. I could hear Monica barking orders, her voice shrill and manic, directing the movers to place the Mustang in the garage and hang the oil paintings in the foyer for maximum impact. Suddenly, the lock on my bedroom door clicked. I scrambled back to the bed and pulled the covers up just as the door swung open. Monica stood there, silhouetted by the hall light. She looked exhausted, her hair fraying at the edges, but her eyes were bright with a dangerous chemical energy. She was holding a plastic medical syringe without a needle, filled with a thick amber liquid. "It is time to sleep, Gerald," she said, marching over to the bedside.
We have a very big day tomorrow, and I cannot have you banging on the pipes or weeping through the door while I am entertaining guests." She did not ask for permission. She grabbed my jaw with a strength that surprised me, digging her manicured nails into my cheeks to force my mouth open. I tried to turn my head, but she was relentless. "Open up," she hissed. "This is a potent sedative. It will knock you out for 12 hours. It is for your own good." She jammed the plastic tip between my teeth and plunged the plunger down. The liquid flooded my mouth, tasting of bitter metal and chemicals.
My instinct was to gag, to spit it right in her face. But I remembered the mission. I remembered Leo in the basement. I forced my throat to stay open, but I did not swallow. I let the thick sludge pool under my tongue, pressing it down hard against the floor of my mouth. I made a loud gulping sound with my throat and let my head drop back onto the pillow. Monica watched me closely for a moment, looking for any sign of deception. When my eyelids fluttered and closed, she seemed satisfied. "Good night, Gerald," she whispered. "Try not to die before the auction is over." She turned and walked out, locking the deadbolt behind her. The moment the click echoed through the room, I sat up. I grabbed the handkerchief from my nightstand and spat the mouthful of amber poison into the cloth. I wiped my tongue frantically, trying to get every drop out, but the drug was powerful. Even the small amount that had absorbed into the lining of my mouth was already making my head spin. My limbs felt heavy, as if they were made of lead. I fought the darkness creeping at the edges of my vision. I could not sleep, not yet. I had to stay awake enough to maintain the ruse. I hid the stained handkerchief inside my pillowcase and lay back down, arranging my body to look like a corpse. I slowed my breathing, waiting for the drugs to pull me under, but keeping one tiny spark of consciousness alive. Tomorrow was the battle, and I needed to be ready to wake up when the first shot was fired. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the suburban street bathed in the artificial orange glow of the street lamps. I dragged myself to the window, my limbs still feeling heavy and numb from the residue of the sedative I had barely managed to spit out. My head swam with a dull fog, but my mind was sharpening with every passing minute, fueled by adrenaline and the cold promise of retribution. Through the narrow sliver of space between the rough pine boards Bradley had nailed over the glass, I watched the parade begin. They did not arrive in family minivans or neighbors' pickup trucks. They arrived in sleek black sedans with tinted windows so dark they looked like voids in the night. A Mercedes Maybach pulled up to the curb, followed closely by a matte black Range Rover and a vintage Rolls-Royce. The drivers kept the engines running, the exhaust plumes rising into the damp Seattle air like ghosts. Men stepped out, adjusting expensive Italian suits that could not quite hide the bulge of shoulder holsters or the jagged scars of violent pasts. These were not the antique enthusiasts from the local historical society. These were the wolves of the black market. Men who bought history not to preserve it, but to hide their blood money and tangible assets. They moved with a predatory grace, scanning the perimeter before walking up the driveway. Downstairs, the transformation was complete. I could hear the soft, smooth notes of jazz music drifting up through the floorboards, a sophisticated soundtrack to a felony. The house smelled of expensive perfume and the heavy musk of imported cigars, masking the scent of the betrayal that had rotted this family from the inside out. And at the center of it all was Monica. I could picture her perfectly, from the sounds of her voice echoing in the foyer. She was wearing the blood-red evening gown she had bought for the charity gala she never managed to get invited to. Tonight she was finally the queen of her own court. Her laugh was a sharp crystal sound, brittle and fake as she greeted each guest. "Welcome, everyone. Please come in," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial charm. "The champagne is in the parlor, and the main viewing will begin shortly. We have some truly exquisite pieces for you tonight." She was playing the role of the high society hostess, perfectly oblivious to the fact that she was walking into a lion's den. Bradley sounded different. His voice was higher, tighter. He was out of his depth. He was a small-time gambler, swimming with great white sharks. "Can I get you a drink, Mr. Volkov?" he stammered. He was terrified. He knew that if anything went wrong tonight, if a single item was proven fake, these men would not sue him. They would erase him. I sat back against the wall, clutching the pillow where I had hidden the real certificates of authenticity. Downstairs, they were admiring my maritime clocks and my Mustang, thinking they were buying prestige. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. Monica was charming them with lies, pouring vintage wine and shaking hands that had likely held guns just hours before. She thought she was ascending to the upper class. In reality, she was arranging the seating chart for her own destruction. The players were on the stage, the audience was seated, and the curtain was about to rise on the final act. I closed my eyes and waited for the signal. The lock on my bedroom door clicked open for the second time that night. But this time, Monica was not alone. Two burly men in catering uniforms, who looked more like bouncers, hoisted me out of bed and dropped me into a transport wheelchair. I let my head loll to the side and my mouth hang open, feigning the total collapse of my faculties. Monica smoothed my hair with a rough, aggressive hand, her diamond bracelet scratching my forehead. She checked my appearance, ensuring I looked sufficiently disheveled to sell the narrative she had constructed. She wheeled me out into the hallway and towards the top of the stairs. The sound of jazz and low laughter drifted up, growing louder with every revolution of the wheels. This was it. I was the prop in her tragedy. She pushed me onto the chairlift, the mechanical whirring drawing eyes as I descended slowly into the lion's den. The living room was unrecognizable. My comfortable sanctuary had been turned into a gallery. High-intensity spotlights were rigged up pointing at the oil paintings. My Mustang Shelby sat visible through the open garage door, polished to a mirror shine. And standing amidst the ruins of my life were 24 people who smelled of money and violence. Monica wheeled me to the very center of the room, right next to the display of my antique maritime clocks. She tapped a crystal glass with a silver spoon to call for silence. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. I saw pity in some, greed in others, and total indifference in most. These men were used to profiting from misery. "Ladies and gentlemen," Monica began, her voice trembling with a perfectly rehearsed emotion. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. As you can see, this is a difficult night for our family." She rested a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it just hard enough to hurt. "This is Gerald, my father-in-law. He was once a brilliant man, a captain of industry. But as you can see, time has been cruel. The dementia has taken almost everything from him. He requires 24-hour care, specialized facilities, and treatments that are simply beyond our modest means." She paused to wipe a fake tear from her cheek with a lace handkerchief. A few of the guests murmured sympathetically. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She was selling my life to pay for her greed, but she framed it as a sacrifice for my well-being. "That is why we are here," she continued, gesturing to my beloved collection. "We are forced to liquidate these assets not because we want to, but because we must. Every dollar raised tonight goes directly to Gerald's medical trust, to ensure his final days are peaceful. We are selling his past to secure his future. I sat there, slumped in the chair, staring at the polished tips of Mr. Volkov's shoes. Inside, I was screaming. I wanted to stand up and shout that she was a liar and a thief. I wanted to tell them about the fake medical records and the drugged milk, but I forced my body to remain limp. I drooled slightly, letting a line of saliva run down my chin to complete the image of the helpless invalid. Let them think I was gone. Let them think I was nothing more than a vegetable to be discarded. Because the more they underestimated me, the harder they would fall when the truth came out. I was not the victim here. I was the bait, and the trap was about to snap shut. The jazz music faded into the background as Monica clapped her hands, signaling the main event. She walked over to the open garage door, where the spotlight beam cut through the gloom to illuminate the curves of my 1967 Mustang Shelby GT 500. The Acapulco blue paint shimmered under the halogen lights, looking as lethal and beautiful as the day I drove it off the lot. A collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the room. These men were criminals and money launderers, but they knew machinery. They knew that car was not just a vehicle. It was a piece of American history. And seeing it there, unguarded, was like seeing a pile of gold bars left on the sidewalk. "Shall we open the floor?" Monica announced. Her voice steady, but I could hear the tremor of excitement underneath. "We will start the bidding at a modest $50,000 for this pristine example of muscle car heritage." 50,000. A deep voice grunted from the back of the room. It was Mr. Volkov, the man with the scar. It was an insulting opening bid, barely a fraction of the car's worth, but it was a start. I watched Bradley from the corner of my eye. He was standing near the fireplace, clutching a glass of scotch so tightly his knuckles were white. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the chill in the room. I knew exactly what he was thinking. 50,000 would barely cover the interest on his gambling debts for a month. He needed more. He needed a miracle. He looked at the bidders with a desperation that was painful to witness, his eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal. 75,000, came a call from a man in a white linen suit near the window. 85, Volkov countered without looking up from his phone. The air in the room grew heavy with tension, thick with the smell of expensive cigars and raw avarice. The numbers began to climb steadily. 100,000. 120. With every jump in price, I saw Bradley's posture change. He stood a little straighter. The panic in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a feverish glint of greed. He was not looking at the car he had grown up washing in the driveway on Sundays. He was looking at a pile of chips on a poker table. He was mentally spending the money paying off loan sharks, buying more time to ruin his life. 150,000, a new bidder shouted. Monica was glowing. She moved through the room with the grace of a shark in water, pointing to bidders, encouraging the war. She looked at Bradley and winked. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated corruption. They were high on the thrill of the theft. They had forgotten about the sick old man drooling in the wheelchair just a few feet away. To them, I was already a ghost, a minor inconvenience they had successfully managed. $200,000, Volkov said, his voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. The room went silent. 200,000. It was a staggering amount for a cash transaction in a living room. Bradley let out a breath that sounded like a sob of relief. A smile broke across his face, a grotesque expression of salvation. He looked at Monica and nodded frantically, urging her to close the deal. He thought he had won. He thought he was free. I sat there motionless, my heart breaking for the son I had lost to this madness, but my resolve hardening like steel. Let them have their moment of triumph. Let them taste the victory. It would only make the fall that much more devastating. Monica raised her hand, ready to accept the bid, ready to sell my heart to the highest bidder. Down in the suffocating darkness of the basement, my grandson was no longer the frightened boy who had been thrown down the stairs hours ago. He was a soldier on a mission. The heavy thumping of the jazz bass from the living room vibrated through the ceiling beams, creating a rhythmic cover for his escape. Leo stood on top of a stack of old paint cans, balancing precariously as he reached for the top hinge of the door. In his hand, he gripped the flathead screwdriver I had managed to drop through the floor vent in the guest room earlier that afternoon. It was a rusty old tool, but to him, it was the key to freedom. The layers of paint on the hinges were thick and stubborn. Leo gritted his teeth and dug the metal tip into the slot of the hinge pin. He hammered the handle of the screwdriver with the heel of his palm, just as the crowd upstairs erupted in applause for another sold item. The noise masked the sharp metallic clang as the pin finally dislodged. He worked feverishly, sweat stinging his eyes despite the chill of the underground room. His knuckles were scraped and bleeding, but he did not stop. He knew that upstairs, his grandfather was being paraded around like a circus animal, and he was the only one who could stop the show. He moved to the bottom hinge. This one was easier. With a final grunt of effort, he popped the second pin loose. Now came the dangerous part. The heavy, solid oak door was no longer attached to the frame on the right side, but it was still locked on the left. Leo wedged the screwdriver into the gap and pried with all his weight. The wood groaned in protest. He pushed and pulled, wiggling the heavy slab until it shifted. With a terrifying lurch, the door swung inward from the hinge side, creating a triangular gap just wide enough for a small boy to squeeze through. Leo slipped into the hallway, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He held his breath, listening. He could hear Monica's shrill laugh echoing from the living room. She was drunk on power and champagne, completely unaware that her prisoner had just broken jail. Leo did not go toward the noise. He turned left, moving silently in his socks through the mudroom, toward the back entrance of the house. He reached the back door and slid the lock open with trembling fingers. The cool night air hit his face, carrying the scent of rain and wet earth. It smelled like liberty. He stepped out into the backyard, keeping low behind the hedges, avoiding the glare of the security lights. He ran to the rear garden gate, the one that opened into the alleyway. He fumbled with the latch, his hands shaking from the adrenaline dump. As the gate swung open, a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Mitchell. He was drenched in rain, standing tall and grim in his trench coat. Behind him were two uniformed police officers and the forensic team from the storage unit. Leo looked up at them, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to cry. He did not say a word. He just pointed toward the house where the lights were blazing and the auction was reaching its fever pitch. Mitchell nodded and placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. It was a silent promise that the nightmare was over. The cavalry had arrived, and they were not coming to bid. They were coming to arrest. The auction for the collection of 19th-century maritime oil paintings had reached a fever pitch. Monica stood at the front of the room, a triumphant smile painted on her lips as the bidding war between Mr. Volkov and a private collector from Hong Kong pushed the price past $300,000. She raised her hand, ready to close the deal, her eyes shining with the reflection of the wealth she believed she had finally secured. Bradley was practically vibrating with excitement, refilling champagne glasses with a hand that shook from adrenaline rather than fear.
Going once, Monica sang out, her voice ringing clear over the hushed crowd. Going twice, sold to the gentleman in the back for $320,000. She turned to point at the large projection screen behind her, which was displaying a high-resolution image of the centerpiece painting. But before she could finish her sentence, the screen flickered violently. The image of the majestic ship on the stormy sea distorted, tearing into jagged lines of digital noise. A harsh burst of static blasted from the surround sound speakers, making several guests jump and spill their drinks. Monica frowned, tapping her microphone. "Bradley, fix it," she hissed, assuming it was just a technical glitch. But it was not a glitch. The screen went black for a heartbeat, plunging the room into confusion. Then it flared to life again, but the paintings were gone. In their place was gritty handheld footage stamped with yesterday's date. The camera angle was low, hidden inside the dashboard of a car. It showed a dusty storage unit. It showed Unit 247. A murmur rippled through the crowd as they watched two figures on the screen moving heavy crates. It was Monica and Bradley. They looked nothing like the polished hosts standing in the living room. On screen, they were sweaty, disheveled, and arguing. Then came the audio. It was crystal clear, broadcast at full volume through the expensive speakers they had set up for music. "We need to move the clocks before the insurance adjuster comes back." Bradley's voice boomed through the room. "If he finds out the garage fire was staged, we are going to jail." The real Bradley, standing by the fireplace, dropped a bottle of champagne. It shattered on the hearth, the sound echoing like a gunshot. But nobody looked at him. They were glued to the screen. The video cut to a new clip. This one, audio only, accompanied by a waveform visual. It was the recording from the hallway the night before. "I forged the signature on the power of attorney," Monica's recorded voice shrieked, cutting through the air with terrifying clarity. "I transferred his pension fund to your gambling account. Without me, you are just a bankrupt loser." The silence that fell over the room was heavier than lead. The air was sucked out of the space, leaving only the damning echo of their own confessions. Monica stood frozen on the stage, her hands still raised in the air, her face draining of color until she looked like a wax statue. She looked at the screen, and then slowly turned her head to look at the guests. The men in the room, the dangerous collectors and black market dealers, were not smiling anymore. They were not looking at the art. They were looking at the hosts who had just admitted to selling them stolen goods involved in insurance fraud. Mr. Volkov slowly placed his drink on a side table, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. They realized they had been invited not to a sale, but to a crime scene, and they did not like being made into accessories. I sat in my wheelchair in the center of the room, watching the blood drain from my daughter-in-law's face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The mask of the loving caregiver had been ripped away, and underneath was nothing but a thief. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror, finally realizing that the old man she had drugged and silenced was the one holding the remote control. The trap had snapped shut, and there was nowhere left to run. The screen behind Monica continued to broadcast her sins on a loop, her voice screeching about forgery and theft over the stunned silence of the crowd. The room, which had been filled with the polite murmurs of commerce just moments ago, was now vibrating with a dangerous tension. The men in the room shifted their stances, hands drifting toward coats and waistbands. They were not people who tolerated betrayal, and they were looking at Monica and Bradley with eyes that promised violence. "Turn it off!" Monica screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate shriek. "Bradley, do something! Pull the plug! Kill the power! She was flailing, running toward the projector like a woman possessed, trying to block the image of her own crime with her body. But it was too late. The truth was out, and it was playing in high definition. Bradley stood frozen by the fireplace, a broken statue of a man watching his life disintegrate, frame by frame. I sat in the center of the chaos, watching them panic. It was time. The act was over. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of a free man.
I gripped the leather armrests of the wheelchair not to steady myself, but to push off. Slowly, deliberately, I stopped slouching. I straightened my spine, feeling the vertebrae click into place one by one. I lifted my chin, wiping away the fake saliva I had allowed to pool there. The vacancy left my eyes, replaced by the steel gaze of the man who had built this estate from the ground up. I reached down and grabbed the faded, moth-eaten blanket Monica had draped over my legs to make me look pathetic. With one sharp motion, I ripped it away and tossed it onto the floor. Underneath, I was not wearing the stained pajamas they had dressed me in. I was wearing my midnight blue three-piece suit. It was the suit I had worn to bury my wife. The suit I had worn to close the biggest deals of my career. It was crisp, tailored, and commanded respect. A gasp rippled through the room, starting from the front row and spreading back. Mr. Volkov took a step back, his eyes widening. Bradley made a choking sound, as if he were seeing a ghost rise from the grave. I planted my feet firmly on the Persian rug and stood up. I did not wobble. I did not shake. I rose to my full height of 6'2", towering over the wheelchair that had been my prison. I buttoned my jacket with steady hands and adjusted my silk tie. I was no longer the invalid. I was the patriarch. Monica froze. She turned slowly, her eyes traveling up from the empty wheelchair to my face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The arrogance was gone, washed away by a primal terror. She looked small and cheap standing there in her red dress. I ignored her. I turned to face the room of criminals and collectors, my voice booming from my chest, deep and resonant, without a trace of the rasp I had faked for months. "Please forgive the theatricality, gentlemen," I said, smoothing my cuffs. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding about the inventory tonight." I stepped over the discarded blanket and walked toward the stunned crowd, moving with the confident stride of a soldier. "You were invited here to bid on my possessions," I continued, my eyes locking with Volkov's. "But I am afraid nothing here is for sale. However, you have all just become witnesses to a much more interesting transaction. Welcome to my real auction. We are not selling antiques tonight. We are dispensing justice." The silence following my declaration was shattered not by applause, but by the wail of sirens cutting through the night air like a knife. Blue and red lights erupted outside the bay windows, turning the elegant showroom into a strobe-lit nightmare. The heavy oak front doors, which Monica had barred to keep me in, were blasted open with a deafening crash. A swarm of uniformed officers flooded the foyer, their weapons drawn, their voices barking commands that cut through the stagnant air like razor wire. "Police, get down on the ground, now!" The wealthy criminals and collectors who had been sipping my champagne just moments ago dropped to their knees, their hands laced behind their heads, their arrogance evaporating instantly in the face of federal authority. Through the chaos strode Mitchell. He looked like a grim reaper in a wet trench coat, water dripping from the brim of his hat onto the marble floor. He did not look at the criminals cowering against the walls. He walked straight toward the fireplace where my son and his wife stood trembling. He reached into his jacket,
not for a weapon, but for a folded piece of paper that carried the weight of a guillotine blade. "Bradley and Monica Sullivan," he announced, his voice booming over the din. "I have a warrant for your immediate arrest." He began to read the charges, and every word was a hammer blow that drove them further into the ground. False imprisonment, aggravated elder abuse in the first degree, grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, and the dissipation of assets under false pretenses. Bradley looked at the handcuffs swinging from the officer's belt, and his legs simply gave out. He collapsed onto the Persian rug, sobbing like a toddler who had dropped his ice cream. He crawled toward me on his hands and knees, his expensive suit pants dragging on the floor, his face wet with snot and tears. "Dad, please," he blubbered, grabbing at the hem of my trousers with shaking hands. "Dad, tell them it is a mistake. I am your son. I am your little boy. You cannot let them take me to jail. I did it for us, Dad. I did it for the family. Help me, please." I looked down at him. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt a profound, hollow pity. He was 40 years old, yet he was still a child, expecting me to clean up his mess, expecting me to fix the window he had broken. But this was not a broken window. This was a broken soul. I stepped back, pulling my leg away from his grasp, as if his touch burned. "I helped you enough, Bradley," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I am helping you learn the consequences of your actions for the first time in your life." Monica did not beg. She exploded. When the female officer reached for her wrist, she lashed out, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. She kicked and spat, her face contorted into a mask of demonic rage. "You planned this, you sick old man!" she shrieked as they forced her arms behind her back, twisting them until she yelped. "You set us up. This is my house. These are my things. You cannot do this to me. I am a victim here. It was all him. It was all Bradley's idea." The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight cut off her tirade. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. She continued to scream, blaming Bradley, blaming Leo, blaming the world as they frog-marched her toward the door. She looked back at me one last time, her eyes burning with hate. But I just stood there, tall and unmoving, watching the red lights dance across the ceiling. The auction was officially over, and the only items being removed from the premises were the two people who had tried to sell my life. The wheels of justice usually turn slowly, grinding through months of delays and motions. But when you grease them with high-definition video confessions and stacks of forged documents, they spin with terrifying speed. The weeks following the auction were a blur of depositions and court dates. Mitchell was a shark, cutting through their defenses with the precision of a surgeon. There was no wiggle room for them. No plea bargains were offered. We had given the district attorney everything they needed, wrapped in a bow. The video of them planning the arson, the audio of the elder abuse, and the testimony of the shady collectors who turned witness to save their own skins created an avalanche of proof that no lawyer could stop. I sat in the back row of the courtroom for the sentencing. I wanted to look away, but I forced myself to watch. It was my duty to see it through to the end. Bradley looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit. The expensive suits and the false bravado were gone, leaving behind a frightened, middle-aged man who had never really grown up. He refused to look at me. He kept his head down, staring at his shackled hands, weeping softly. Monica was different. She sat ramrod straight, her face a mask of stone. Even in handcuffs, she had that look of disdain, as if the judge were merely an inconveniencing customer she wanted to speak to the manager about. She never showed remorse, only anger that her plan had failed. The judge was an old woman with eyes like flint, and she did not mince words.
She called their actions repugnant. She spoke about the betrayal of trust and the systematic predation on a vulnerable family member. When the gavel finally fell, it sounded like a thunderclap, clearing the air after a long storm. 15 years for Monica, 12 for Bradley. They were dragged away to separate facilities, their toxic partnership dissolved by the very greed that had forged it. As for their grand dream, it evaporated like mist. The Monica Heights project, which had been the catalyst for all this madness, turned out to be a house of cards. When the news of the arrest broke, the investors fled like rats from a sinking ship. The bank auditors descended and found that the loans were based on inflated assets and lies. The land they had purchased was seized, the blueprints were scrapped, and the limited liability company was dissolved. There would be no luxury condos bearing her name. There would be no monument to her vanity. Just a vacant lot, and a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition outpaces morality. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, leaning on my cane. Not because I needed it, but because I liked the feel of the solid wood in my hand. It was over. The house was mine again, legally and spiritually. The predators were in cages where they could not hurt anyone else. I took a deep breath of the city air. It tasted different now. It tasted clean. I hailed a cab, not to go back to a prison, but to go home to my grandson. We had a lot of cleaning up to do, and a lot of bad memories to scrub from the walls. But for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. The ink on the deed was still wet when I handed the keys to the young couple standing on the porch. They looked at the sprawling house with stars in their eyes, seeing a place to raise a family and build a future. I looked at it and saw only the past. For 6 months, I had tried to live there after the trial. I had scrubbed the walls and replaced the furniture, but the ghosts were too loud. Every time I walked down the hallway, I remembered the fall. Every time I looked at the basement door, I heard Leo sobbing. The house that Beatrice and I had built with love had been tainted by greed and betrayal. It was no longer a home. It was just a building, filled with echoes I no longer wanted to hear. So I sold it. I sold it all. I walked down the driveway for the last time, not looking back. Leo was waiting for me at the curb, sitting on his duffel bag, kicking his heels against the pavement. He looked different now, taller. The shadows under his eyes were gone, replaced by the bright curiosity of a teenager who had his childhood gave back to him. He stood up as I approached, shielding his eyes against the summer sun. "Are we really doing this, Grandpa?" he asked, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. I smiled back, feeling lighter than I had in 20 years. "We are really doing this, kid." I led him around the corner to where our new life was parked. It was not a condo in a retirement village. It was not a small apartment in the city. It was a beast of a machine. A 45-foot Class A motorhome that gleamed like a silver bullet in the sunlight. It was a land yacht, complete with expanding slide-outs, a king-size master suite for me, and a high-tech bunk area for Leo. It had a full kitchen with granite countertops, a satellite connection so Leo could do his schooling on the road, and an engine that purred with the promise of adventure. Leo's jaw dropped. He ran his hand along the smooth metal side. "It is huge," he whispered. "It is like a spaceship." "It is better than a spaceship," I said, unlocking the door. "It is freedom." We spent the next hour loading the last of our essential belongings.
I had sold the antique clocks. I had sold the paintings. I realized I did not need things to define who I was. I kept the photos of Beatrice, my medals, and a few books.
Everything else was just luggage. Leo claimed the navigator's seat in the front cockpit, setting up his maps and his playlist. I climbed into the driver's seat. It was high and comfortable, like a throne. I adjusted the mirrors and looked at my grandson. He was buckling his seatbelt, looking at the road ahead with pure anticipation. There was no fear in him anymore. We were not running away from something. We were driving toward something. "Where to first?" Captain Leo asked, punching a destination into the GPS. I started the engine, feeling the massive diesel power hum beneath us. I thought about all the places I had promised to take Beatrice, but never did, because work always got in the way. I thought about the Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, the Pacific Coast Highway. "West," I said, releasing the parking brake. "We are going to chase the sunset, Leo. And we are not stopping until we run out of road." I pulled the rig out onto the main street, leaving the neighborhood of manicured lawns and hidden secrets behind us forever. The house was sold, the traders were in prison, and Gerald Sullivan was finally back in the driver's seat of his own life. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and burning gold. We had been on the road for 3 weeks now, and the claustrophobic shadows of the old house felt like a lifetime ago. We had parked the massive silver motorhome on a ridge overlooking a glassy lake in Montana. The air here was thin and crisp, smelling of pine needles and wood smoke. I stood at the small portable grill flipping burgers while the fat sizzled and popped onto the coals. It was a simple meal, but after months of drugged soup and microwave dinners, it smelled like a feast fit for a king. Leo sat in a canvas folding chair, staring into the glowing embers of the small campfire we had built. He was holding a skewer with a marshmallow on it, but he wasn't toasting it. He was just watching the flames dance. He had been quiet all evening, the kind of heavy silence that usually precedes a storm. I plated the burgers and handed him one wrapped in a paper towel. He took it but didn't eat. He looked up at me, his eyes reflecting the firelight, and the question he had been holding in for miles finally spilled out. "Grandpa?" he asked, his voice barely louder than the crackling wood. "Do you miss him? Do you miss Dad?" I stopped chewing. I set my plate down on the picnic table and wiped my hands. It was the question I had been dreading, but also the one I knew we had to answer to truly move forward. I looked out at the lake, watching a lone eagle circle the water. I did not want to lie to the boy. He had seen too many lies already. I walked over and sat in the empty chair next to him, leaning forward so our elbows touched. "I miss the little boy he used to be," I said softly, choosing my words with care. "I miss the toddler who used to run to the door when I came home from work. I miss the teenager who helped me wash the Mustang on Sundays. But the man he became, the man who hurt us and locked you in a basement. No, Leo, I do not miss him. I mourn him. It is like he died a long time ago and we just didn't notice the funeral." Leo looked down at his shoes, kicking at a loose stone. "But he is still family, right? Even if he is bad, he is still my dad." I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. It was strong now, no longer the frail shoulder of a victim. Leo looked at me. "You have to learn the most important lesson I can teach you. Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. It makes you related, but it does not make you family. Family is not about whose name you have. It is about who has your back. Family is the people who stand by you when the house is burning down, not the ones lighting the match. Family is the person who taps a message on a radiator pipe in the middle of the night to let you know you are not alone. Tears welled in his eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief. He realized he didn't have to carry the guilt of his father's sins. "You are my family, Leo," I whispered. "You are the only legacy I need." He dropped the skewer and leaned into me, burying his face in my flannel shirt. We sat there for a long time, two survivors keeping each other warm by the fire. Eventually, the fire burned down to coals, and the first stars began to poke through the twilight canvas above. "Come on, kid," I said, patting his back. "The road is calling." We kicked dirt over the fire and packed the chairs away. The heavy door of the RV hissed shut, sealing us in our mobile sanctuary. I climbed into the captain's chair and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, powerful rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Leo took his seat beside me, opening the large paper map on his lap. "Which way, Grandpa?" he asked, tracing a red line with his finger. I released the brake and pulled out onto the highway, the headlights cutting a bright path through the darkness. "Forward, Leo," I said, smiling as the lake disappeared in the rearview mirror. "We are just going forward." The most powerful lesson from Gerald's journey is that we should never mistake silence for weakness or age for fragility. The people who have lived the longest often have the sharpest minds and the strongest wills. This story also redefines what it means to be a family. True family is not defined by DNA, but by loyalty, sacrifice, and love. While greed destroyed Bradley and Monica, it was courage and trust that saved Gerald and Leo. In the end, the greatest wealth is not a big house or a fancy car. It is the freedom to live life on your own terms with the people who truly love you. If this story of justice and redemption touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey.